It's been a bit over a year now since Starfield came out, and I think we're pretty much all in agreement. It was a dud. Fans utterly rejected it. No one liked it. Not one single person liked it. I think that is the undisputed truth. There were a few copers out there who were sort of saying, no, this can't be happening. Like, I was waiting for that Bethesda experience yet again, like I had with Skyrim. This just cannot be happening. No, there must be something special here. Slowly over time, those people realized the truth. But there was one narrative that I used to see that you might remember, which was, oh, there's just all these people jumping on the hate bandwagon. They're just laughing at Starfield, getting online and talking bad about it. But just give it some time, give it a year or so, and people will come to love Starfield. They'll realize it's great. The hate is just temporary. Well, now, here we are, 14, 15 months later, and were those people right? Was there a big positive turnaround for the game? Have things changed? Well, according to Steam reviews, most recently, 45% of people have given the game a positive review, while all time, 59% of people had given it a positive review. So people are more negative now about Starfield than they ever have been. So the idea that it was just temporary hate, people want to hate things, it's actually not true. The more time that they spend with Starfield, that they think about this game, the more that they hate it, and they think about what could have been, that we could have got maybe a new Elder Scrolls or Fallout in quicker time. And that is the question, are Bethesda going to learn from this? That Starfield was a failed experiment, and maybe they should just go back to what worked for them. Sure, we can praise them for trying a new IP, trying something new, but it failed. Are they going to go back to what works and what people really want? It doesn't seem so. It seems like instead they're going to double down on Starfield 2 and Starfield 3. And I'm talking about this because of an article that's been doing the rounds. We can see here, Starfield 2 will be one hell of a game, claims designer, as Bethesda learns from its mistakes. They've never learned from any mistakes. The history of Bethesda, I'll explain it to you extremely quickly. They released Daggerfall, the Elder Scrolls 2, many years ago. They then released Morrowind on the Xbox, their first console and PC game. It does extremely well on Xbox, and Todd Howard and Bethesda realized, hey, we can make a lot of money on console. We can also make a lot of money off people who we think are dumb. We as developers think are dumb, so we're going to dumb down every one of our games thereafter. So Oblivion, we're going to remove all the RPG stuff. We'll continue to do that with Skyrim. You get all the way to Fallout 4, and you can barely recognize that this studio was once known for role-playing games. They got in a full-on action direction, and over time, they stripped away a lot of their strengths, the things that made them unique. And then you get to Starfield, where all that is left is just all of the bad stuff, the things that you didn't like about Bethesda, the bugs, the loading screens, the pretty just ordinary mechanics, like the combat. I mean, when has combat ever been good in a Bethesda game? It never has been, but the quality exploration and a lot of the unique things that you could do in their older games, they made up for it. So Starfield basically just pulled back the curtain and showed people that this was a dev studio that had some moments of brilliance, some unique design philosophies in amongst a whole lot of mediocrity. And now those little moments of brilliance, they're few and far between. We're just left with the crap. They don't learn from any mistakes because people have been telling them for years that you're getting away from the good things. You used to make RPGs, now you're focused on an action direction because you think you're going to make more money, you're greedy, and you're also crap at what you do. This is what has been happening for a long time. They do not learn, they double down on shitty decisions. They've been arrogant with the Starfield reception, deluding themselves. Oh no, the game has sold a lot of copies. There's a lot of people playing on Game Pass. That means a success, right? Because people are basically playing it for free, even though they haven't committed to purchasing it. Totally doubling down, even though we all know that the only reason anyone played it in the first place is because of their prior reputation. It had nothing to do with the quality of Starfield itself. And if we look at this article, it says here, Starfield hasn't clicked with fans, but designer Bruce Nesmith believes the game is a strong foundation for a future sequel. It's a funny choice of words because it's the opposite. The game is not a strong foundation. That is the worst part. The actual foundation of Starfield, what it was built on sand. It was doomed from the very start. Like, the first time that they were in a room planning, conceiving the game, that's when it fell apart. It wasn't like while they were a few years in, they made a few crappy decisions. No. From the very conception of Starfield, it was doomed. All these millions and millions of planets, procedural generation, you can't actually fly in space. All of this junk, that's when it fell apart. And because of, I would say, toxic positivity, no one ever put their hand up and said, hey, guys, we're not good at this. Let's just make handcrafted world. Let's not go overboard and bloat the game like we have with so many titles now. Let's just make something that is quality over quantity, maybe the same sort of size as Fallout 4 Skyrim, but let's get back to the RPG mechanics that many of our older fans loved, and RPGs seem to be becoming more mainstream. But in their arrogance, they couldn't help themselves. They tried to make something impossible that wasn't going to work in the creation engine. And some people will say they shouldn't have used the engine, they should have tried Unreal or something and gone for that. I don't know. I think once you take away the creation engine from Bethesda, you'll actually have nothing at all. They'll be totally worthless. And it might be that all the talent has deserted and there's no way they could ever make an actual good game again. It might be impossible. But I do think that if there's anything to redeem them, it probably is just making more of an old school Bethesda game, just going back to basics and trying to do what's maybe worked before. But the idea of Starfield being a strong foundation, where it doesn't do anything well. The only little bits of praise that I see from people trying to be objective is the shipbuilding. It's, oh, well, the shipbuilding was pretty good, even though exploration non-existent, the combat, it sucks as it always does in these games. Quests, main story, it's all pretty much mediocre. But the shipbuilding, even though you can't fly in space, space is just another fake loading screen that insults your intelligence. It's like when you play a game with maybe an elevator, or when you have to crawl through a crevice. That's loading the next area, but it's trying not to break immersion. That's what space in Starfield is, but they went overboard with it and just waste your time. You've got to click on 5, 6 different things, buttons, to get to the next planet, to do your next crappy quest. And then you have to repeat that process 2 or 3 times because every second quest is a fetch quest. You're like a delivery driver. Nesmith, who left Bethesda in 2021, but is clearly still close to the developers over there, he worked on Starfield, he was part of all of this. He says that the release of Starfield is similar to the debuts of Mass Effect or Assassin's Creed. That is totally false, because Mass Effect was like a spiritual successor to Knights of the Old Republic, so it already had a pretty good template to build off, and I think that the first one, it was the most RPG. I think a lot of fans might even appreciate it as the best game. It had that nice hub world, the Citadel, which was kind of like a Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines hub, or something you would find in Knights of the Old Republic. They didn't repeat that in the sequels. Mass Effect 2, it's very mission-based, and then the third just sort of went off the rails, I think. It was just too action-focused. The idea that that series improved as it went along, that's bullshit. I mean, the lesson from Starfield is we're just not creative when it comes to space, using our imagination. If you think of creativity, even Fallout, where you've got the Pip-Boy and all these unique enemies and different things in the game, you have to remember, they created none of that. Bethesda did not create anything really that interesting in the Fallout universe. Most of it came like 30 years ago from a completely different developer before Bethesda bought the IP. Bethesda really haven't done that much. They've never actually been very creative. Like the Elder Scrolls, most of the interesting lore probably came from people who left the company a long time ago. This just isn't a very creative studio, and they shouldn't have been doing anything to do with space, because when you think sci-fi, all the possibilities, your imagination can be running wild, and then Bethesda do what they call NASA punk, which is space, but with absolutely nothing interesting with it. They're like, oh, it's our unique perspective on space. It's just boring. There isn't anything interesting here. Why did you bother? While the first entry in some of those IPs, like Mass Effect, are rough around the edges and not as beloved, the flashes of brilliance make for a brilliant sequel. What are the flashes of brilliance in Starfield? I cannot think of any. No one can. Even the fanboys back when it came out, they couldn't actually point to any specifics about why they liked the game. They would just say like, oh, I'm having fun, I'm having such a good time, and it's like, okay, well, what things are you liking about it that I might be missing? And then they just disappear. They can't tell you anything. They just wanted to love the game because they told themselves it'd be the next Skyrim. And they couldn't deal with the reality, the disappointment. The only flashes of brilliance were the memes. Back a year ago, some of the memes, they were genuinely funny, and it was the most entertaining thing about the game, were people laughing at it, the ridiculousness of the NPCs and their faces and everything like that. Those were the only good things. You can bring them back for a sequel. I don't think it'll work so well the second time. People will just get more and more frustrated, and they're not going to waste their money again. If they did this time, there was a lot of people who just played on Game Pass for 10 hours, and they never touched it again. So much for it being a success. That's a fake story. It's not a success. Starfield 2 or 3 will be great. When are we getting this anyway? Because Elder Scrolls 6, what is it, like 4 years probably minimum away? Surely they're going to do Fallout 5 again. I know Starfield, it's like Todd's dream. He said that he went into the CEO of ZeniMax, their publisher's office, after I think it was Fallout 4 came out. And the CEO was like, okay, you're doing Fallout 5 next, you're doing Elder Scrolls 6. And he said, no, I have a dream. We're going to space, 1,000,000 planets. We're going to do this. And then the CEO said, okay, do your thing. That was the biggest mistake ever. That CEO should have said, Todd, you're pretty good on stage. You hype things up. You make false promises, and that makes us a bit of money. But you make bad decisions. No, we're not greenlighting your useless space game. Get to work on Elder Scrolls 6. That's what people wanted. If they did that, he probably would have gotten Elder Scrolls 6 a couple of years ago. And sure, it probably would have disappointed, because I think a lot of these problems are just the team. They're not talented anymore. The good people are gone. But we could have got our answer. Instead, we're probably just going to get disappointed by the Elder Scrolls in a few years. It's just going to delay the inevitable. This continues, and Nez Smith, the developer, he says, with studios spending decades evolving their existing RPGs, Starfield was a new challenge that should result in one hell of a game in the future. The only lesson, if I'm being completely good faith and I'm not just insulting the studio, I would say this: the only real lesson that they can take from Starfield is our number one strength, the only thing that we've really ever done well consistently, is exploration, handcrafted exploration, where there's like environmental storytelling. Like you can sort of tell something weird has happened here, like someone might have taken their own life in tragedy and you read a note, or two people were fighting and you see the remains, you sort of figure out what's happened. It's all quite interesting. Bethesda used to do that stuff quite well. It was more than just doing a quest that had a good story. You could explore the world, and there were lots of mini stories going on, and it was fun to explore these dungeons and explore this world. That just stopped with Starfield. They took out that strength, and that ruined it. People may have been able to overlook some of the weaknesses, the loading screens and everything, if they just focused on, say, a handful of planets that were all handcrafted. Now, the trouble is for them, the DLC promised that. They said we're going back to just one planet that's handcrafted, and that underwhelmed. People felt this was way worse than like their previous big DLC, Far Harbor, for Fallout 4. It was way lower in quality. So then the question becomes, is that even your strength anymore? Do you have any strengths? Is it maybe time just to shut up shop before you further embarrass yourselves? So it's hard to say now. I would have said if they went back to full-on exploration, maybe they could get it right. Now I'm not so sure. They've got a lot to prove. When we built Skyrim, we had the tremendous advantage of Oblivion, which has the tremendous advantage of Morrowind. Don't know about that. I feel like they regressed a bit with Oblivion. Like, what's better in Oblivion compared to Morrowind? I can't really think of anything. Maybe the graphics, but stylistically, Morrowind was a more unique fantasy game visually than Oblivion, which was kind of just generic sword and sorcery. I mean, the only advantage that they'd probably say is, oh, we dumbed it down and made it more accessible for a casual audience who doesn't really like RPGs. So it resulted in more sales, more short-term wins, because that direction, I think, is what ultimately doomed them. So it wasn't really all that great for them. All we had to do was continue to improve and add new stuff in. We didn't have to start from the ground up. If we'd had to start from the ground up, that would have been another 2 or 3 years of development time. Now, I don't know if I buy this, that like Starfield, totally built from scratch, they had nothing to work off. There's so much in it that just feels like it was picked up from Fallout 4. It doesn't feel that unique, even though it's a new IP. Again, it's just missing the good stuff. It's got like all of the bad from Fallout 4. Again, if I try and be objective, because as you know, I'm super fair, I'd say that the only real improvement is that they got rid of the voice protagonist. That was so stupid in Fallout 4 and took so many people out of that role-playing experience, the immersion. They did get rid of that. Otherwise, it just feels like a spin-off of Fallout 4, essentially. It doesn't really feel that new, and I've never believed that they spent like 6 years on it. I think that all of Bethesda's teams went all in on Fallout 76 after it released and flopped, and they realized they had to fix it to, I guess, repair Fallout's reputation. So I think they only actually had like a handful of years working full-time on Starfield, and it's part of why it feels just half-baked. It feels half-assed. I'm looking forward to Starfield 2. I think it's going to be one hell of a game because it's going to address a lot of the things people are saying. Well, they will have to start again anyway, because if anyone at all is going to give Starfield 2, the franchise, another chance, it's going to have to be massively rebooted. No one wants to see any of the same, he calls them moments of brilliance from Starfield. It's all going to go, basically. You can keep the shipbuilding, I'll give you that, but you have to give us something to do in our ship. We've got to actually be able to utilize the ship if you've got to bother putting features like that in the game. There's got to be real exploration. You got to get better at the characters, the writing. You got to fire a meal. Like, if Bethesda want to give themselves some good PR and get people back on their side, if they did like a news story of like Emil, their head writer, just getting fired, goodbye, and they send him on his way and the developers are talking about, we finally realize that our writers are talentless hacks and we're moving them on. If they were to do that, people would be more optimistic than they have been in years about Bethesda. They might give more of their games a chance. Even a Starfield 2 might be looking a bit better. Are they going to do it? Almost certainly not. If you thought some of this stuff was bad, though, this is the worst. This is the delusion on full display. If you look at the first Dragon Age, the first game in a lot of IPs, they tend to show these flashes of brilliance amid a lot of other things that don't quite catch everyone's eye. No, they're not quite as hot and popular. It takes, sadly, sometimes a second or third version of the game in order to really enrich everything. This is a classic example of Bethesda developers who just have no idea of the RPG genre. He's saying that the first Dragon Age is like the worst entry. I've made a couple of videos on Dragon Age, you might have noticed, and the number one point that I make is that Dragon Age Origins is probably the only good entry, and it only gets worse from there. According to this person, legendary Bethesda developer, oh no, like they hadn't found their way with Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age 2, it starts to get a bit better. This is the mind of who's crafting Starfield, and here's what these people need to do. They need to be forced, strapped in, and they've got to play a Dragon Age Origins, or some sort of quality RPG from start to finish. Then you force them to do the same with Starfield. You hook them up to a lie detector, and you ask them to defend Starfield. And like, let's compare these games. You tell me how Starfield is better in any possible way. What are the strengths here? And you'll start to realize that every one of these Bethesda developers, they're in a cult of toxic positivity. No one wants to put up their hand and admit, these are bad ideas. We don't know what we're doing, really. Like Todd Howard, everyone worships you as a god, but it's all fake. You haven't done anything of worth in years. You're basically just a marketing figure at this point. You're not really a developer. Was he ever a developer? I don't really know. But people are not criticizing dog shit ideas. This is a big problem in gaming. This is happening with the Veilguard. It's definitely happened with Bloodlines 2. So many titles. The cultures of these studios, they're just rotten. They let people in who, they're professional victims all day, all night. They're victims, they're never held accountable for doing a bad job, so how can they do a good job? What's their incentive to do a good job? They seem to get more perks and sympathy when they're just crap at everything, so why would they ever improve? But that is the state of Bethesda. I don't think a Starfield 2 is ever going to happen. I think Microsoft as the years go on, they're going to have lost so much money on the Activision purchase. Probably the Bethesda purchase as well. That's not going very well. No one's greenlighting a Starfield 2. The IP, it's dead. It'll probably get that second expansion maybe next year. That'll be the last little burst, and that'll probably be the end of it. But you never know. If a Starfield 2 happens, maybe it will deliver on the comedy front. There might be something redeeming about that. So we'll see. But I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.